It was a crisp Tuesday morning in New York City. The skyline glistened as the sun pierced through the high-rises, and the streets buzzed with their usual cacophony of honks, chatter, and coffee-fueled ambition. But inside ABC's famed studio for The View, the mood was anything but usual. The producers were nervous. Today's episode was bound to spark controversy, ratings, and headlines. The guest of honor? None other than Melania Trump, the former First Lady and now once again the most watched woman in America, as her husband, Donald J. Trump, had reclaimed the presidency just a few months prior. Ever since President Trump announced a fresh round of tariff hikes on imports from China and Europe, a move aimed at reviving American manufacturing but criticized for potential inflation, media outlets were on fire, and The View, known for its fiery debates, saw a golden opportunity. Whoopi Goldberg, the longtime co-host known for her no-nonsense attitude and biting critiques of conservative policies, had something planned, something bold. She wasn't going to let Melania off easy. Backstage, Melania sat calmly, dressed in a sleek white blazer and navy slacks. Her presence radiated the quiet confidence she had cultivated over the years. Critics often underestimated her. That was their first mistake. She knew the headlines would be brutal, the questions aggressive, and the panel ready to pounce. But she didn't flinch. She was here on her own terms. As the theme music blared and the audience erupted into applause, Whoopi leaned into the microphone and introduced the day's guest. Joining us this morning, a woman who's been in the eye of the political storm for years, former First Lady and now back in the White House, Melania Trump. Let's welcome her. Melania walked onto the stage, composed, graceful, and slightly reserved. The applause was mixed, some cheers, some jeers. But she smiled politely, nodded, and took her seat between Whoopi and Sunny Hostin. "Welcome to The View, Mrs. Trump," Whoopi said with a half-smile that barely masked her skepticism. "Thank you for having me," Melania replied with her trademark Eastern European accent, smooth and clear. They made small talk at first. A few minutes about her recent initiatives, some light discussion about her son Barron's college plans, and even a brief moment where Joy Behar cracked a joke that made Melania chuckle. But then the switch flipped. Whoopi leaned in. Her voice sharpened. "Mrs. Trump, let's talk about something real for a second," she said. "Your husband just slapped another round of tariffs on imports, which many say is going to hit the American consumer hard. Groceries, clothing, electronics prices are going up. Do you really believe this is helping everyday Americans?" The studio tensed. Melania didn't blink. She turned toward Whoopi, her smile fading into a look of elegant resolve. "I understand that you like to make things dramatic, Whoopi," she began, voice calm but icy. "But let's talk about facts, not feelings." The audience stirred. Even Sunny Hostin raised her eyebrows. "When my husband raised tariffs, he did not do it to hurt Americans. He did it to protect them from unfair trade, from cheap goods that destroy American jobs. Maybe you don't notice, but millions of working families do." Whoopi's smirk faltered slightly. "But don't you think it's making life harder for people trying to buy basic goods?" Melania leaned in just a touch. "Maybe it's hard for Hollywood people to understand," she said, eyes locked on Whoopi, "but real Americans know the value of making things at home. They don't want cheap, they want jobs. They want pride. And my husband gives them that." Boom. The crowd reacted, half with applause, half with stunned silence. Whoopi tried to interrupt, but Melania wasn't finished. "You ask me if it helps Americans. I ask you, when was the last time you bought something made in Detroit? Or visited a factory in Ohio? These are not just numbers, Whoopi. These are lives." Sunny shifted in her seat, looking toward the producers nervously. The temperature on the stage had clearly risen. Whoopi paused, clearly caught off guard. "Okay, but..." "Let me finish," Melania said firmly. The audience gasped. The set of The View had never felt so still. The crew behind the cameras froze in place. Even the famously chatty Joy Behar looked over her glasses in disbelief. The former First Lady, often dismissed as silent or submissive, had just shut down Whoopi Goldberg with chilling calm. Melania Trump sat up straighter in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Her voice remained even, but her tone had transformed into something unshakable, something that made everyone pay attention. "You know, Whoopi," Melania began again, "when people talk about tariffs, they talk only about short-term pain. What they forget is that every cheap item on the shelf has a cost. Not in dollars, but in dignity. In jobs. In the soul of a country. Whoopi opened her mouth, but Melania was not done. We have allowed China to undercut American companies for decades. They flood our markets with low-cost products made in factories where people are paid pennies and work in conditions you and I would never accept. And then we wonder why towns in Pennsylvania are empty. Why plants in Michigan closed. Why men in their 50s have to start over. Melania turned slightly to face the audience. That is what tariffs are fighting against. Not prices, but poverty. The crowd clapped louder now. She had struck a chord. She wasn't defending policy from a place of theory, but from the heart of Main Street America. Whoopi tried to pull things back. But don't you think this just causes a trade war? She asked, her tone now edged with sarcasm. Isn't it reckless? Melania smiled faintly. You want to call it a war? She said, her eyes gleaming with precision. Then let me ask, when another country manipulates its currency, floods your market, and steals your technology, what would you call it? A picnic. The audience laughed. Joy Behar chuckled, covering her mouth. Melania didn't laugh. She pressed on. This isn't a war we started, but it is one we must finish for the American worker, the American farmer, and the American future. It was now clear to everyone in the studio Melania Trump was not here to be nice. She was here to fight. Sunny Hostin tried to pivot the conversation toward empathy. Mrs. Trump, she said gently, you speak about jobs and factories. But what about single moms struggling to feed their kids when prices go up even a few dollars? Melania nodded, clearly prepared for this. And I understand that, she said. As a mother, I feel that pain. But let me ask, what happens to that same single mother when she loses her job because her company can't compete with foreign prices? What's worse, paying a little more at the store or losing your paycheck entirely? Boom. Another shot landed. The applause returned stronger now. A few members of the audience even stood up, clapping with a slow-building appreciation for what they were witnessing. The cameras zoomed in slightly on Whoopi's face. She looked rattled, not defeated, but thrown off balance. She wasn't used to her targets talking back with such clarity and control. Melania wasn't yelling. She wasn't defensive. She was just brilliant. You want to call my husband's policies harsh, Melania continued. But what's truly harsh is pretending that buying cheap things makes life better while families lose their homes, towns lose their pride, and our country loses its strength. Whoopi raised her hand as if to signal timeout, but Melania stood up slightly in her seat, not leaving, but commanding presence. And let me remind you, we've tried the other way. We tried surrender. We tried outsourcing. We tried apologizing for American success. And what did it give us? Broken communities and hopeless futures. So now we try something else. Something bold. Something unapologetically American. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Melania Trump leaned back, composed, and looked at Whoopi calmly. If that bothers you, Whoopi, she said with a final flash of steel, maybe it's not the tariffs that are the problem. Within seconds of that last line, maybe it's not the tariffs that are the problem, the internet did what it always does. Clips began circulating on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Melania owns Whoopi. Hashtag tariff truth bomb. Hashtag the view meltdown. Hashtag steal elegance. In real time, the moment was going viral, a now iconic face-off where Melania Trump didn't just survive the view, she dominated it. And the contrast was striking, calm elegance versus loud confrontation. Substance versus sound bites. Back on set, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What started as a platform to grill the former First Lady had turned into a masterclass in restraint, knowledge, and national pride. Joy Behar broke the tension with a somewhat forced laugh. Well, that escalated quickly, she quipped. The audience chuckled, but even Joy knew this wasn't just any celebrity interview. It had become a cultural moment. Whoopi, still sitting upright but noticeably quieter, tried once more to steer the conversation. Mrs. Trump, I'll give you this, you're clearly passionate. But there's a difference between being passionate and being right. Economists have warned that these tariffs could backfire. Are you saying they're all wrong? Melania glanced toward her and answered with something no one expected. Some economists also said manufacturing was never coming back to America. Yet last week, we reopened 2 steel mills in Indiana, 1 month into my husband's second term. So yes, some of them are wrong. There was no arrogance in her tone. Just facts. Sunny Hostin, always more measured, leaned forward thoughtfully. You speak with a lot of certainty. But many Americans are divided right now over policy, over truth, over trust. Do you ever worry that the division is too deep to fix? Melania's expression softened. It was the first time her voice carried a personal note, less steel, more soul. Of course I worry. I'm a mother first. I want this country to be strong for my son and every child growing up here. But unity does not come from pretending we agree. It comes from listening and leading. She turned towards Sunny. My husband leads with strength, not softness. And sometimes strength looks like conflict. But it is in that conflict we find clarity. There was a pause. You call it division. I call it debate. And debate is not a weakness, it is a sign of freedom. The audience clapped again. Even a few skeptical producers backstage could be seen nodding slowly behind the cameras. Then Whoopi leaned back with a sigh, clearly trying to regain some footing. All right, Melania. You got your say. I just hope you realize some Americans are scared right now. Scared of rising costs. Scared of losing more. Melania tilted her head slightly and offered something rare for television: empathy. And I do realize that. But we cannot lead from fear. Fear never built a bridge. Fear never started a business. Fear never made America great. What made America great was courage. Vision. And yes, sometimes tough choices. There it was. The audience again burst into applause, louder than before. For once, The View felt like more than just daytime television, it felt like a battle of ideologies. And today, Melania Trump had walked in with armor, intellect, and poise. And it wasn't just the studio that noticed. You speak with a lot of certainty. But many Americans are divided right now over policy, over truth, over trust. Do you ever worry that the division is too deep to fix? Melania's expression softened. It was the first time her voice carried a personal note. Less steel, more soul. Of course I worry. I'm a mother, first. I want this country to be strong for my son and every child growing up here. But unity does not come from pretending we agree. It comes from listening and leading. She turned towards Sunny. My husband leads with strength, not softness. And sometimes, strength looks like conflict. But it is in that conflict we find clarity. There was a pause. You call it division. I call it debate. And debate is not a weakness. It is a sign of freedom. The audience clapped again. Even a few skeptical producers backstage could be seen nodding slowly behind the cameras. Then Whoopi leaned back with a sigh, clearly trying to regain some footing. All right, Melania. You got your say. I just hope you realize some Americans are scared right now. Scared of rising costs. Scared of losing more. Melania tilted her head slightly and offered something rare for television. Empathy. And I do realize that. But we cannot lead from fear. Fear never built a bridge. Fear never started a business. Fear never made America great. What made America great was courage, vision, and yes, sometimes tough choices. There it was. The audience again burst into applause, louder than before. For once, The View felt like more than just daytime television. It felt like a battle of ideologies. And today, Melania Trump had walked in with armor, intellect, and poise. And it wasn't just the studio that noticed. The next morning, headlines blared across the nation. Melania versus Whoopi, the showdown we didn't see coming. Ice Queen melts, The View with tariff truth bombs. Melania Trump, calm, classy, and unapologetically patriotic. Cable news channels looped the clips on repeat. On Fox News, commentators called it a landmark moment for conservative women. CNN called it tense and dramatic, while even left-leaning personalities admitted grudgingly that Melania had held her own. And in Middle America, the diners, the barbershops, the front porches, people were talking. At a steelworkers bar in Youngstown, Ohio, 2 factory workers raised their mugs. She said it plain, man, one said. We don't want cheap junk. We want our jobs back. Yeah, the other nodded. I never saw her speak like that before. But she was fire. Meanwhile, in suburban Florida, a group of moms sat around a kitchen table after school drop-off. I used to think Melania was just the quiet model type, one woman said. But girl, she shut them down with facts. She talked about being a mom too, another added. Not just politics. She gets it. In a high school classroom in Iowa, a civics teacher paused his lesson to show the clip to his students. Listen to how she stays calm under pressure. Whether you agree with her or not, this is how you debate. Even teenagers, usually disinterested in daytime TV, found the clip on TikTok, where it had now 25 million views and counting. Edits were popping up with dramatic music, slow-motion zoom-ins on Melania's steely stare, and captions like, Melania didn't come to play. She came to SLY. Whoopi walked into a verbal buzzsaw. When grace meets grit. And while the internet was busy remixing the moment, strategists in Washington were having serious conversations. Inside the West Wing, Trump's campaign staff had gathered for an impromptu meeting. "We need to clip that moment and run it in ads. Swing states, battlegrounds, all of it," barked the campaign director. "Forget the usual sound bites. This was gold." Melania's appearance had not been planned as a campaign weapon. It was supposed to be a humanizing interview, but it had become something far bigger. She didn't just defend tariffs, one advisor said. She gave them a soul. That night, a major conservative PAC launched a campaign titled, "Stand with Strength. Stand with Melania." The ad featured footage of her confrontation with Whoopi, intercut with scenes of factory workers returning to reopen plants, single moms balancing grocery bags, and American flags flying high in front of small-town businesses. Meanwhile, on The View, the day after the interview, the mood on set was notably subdued. Whoopi entered with her usual coffee mug, but no witty one-liners. Sunny Hostin tried to keep the mood light, but even she looked mildly embarrassed. Joy, always the one to say what others wouldn't, broke the silence. "Okay, can we just admit it? We got steamrolled yesterday." The audience laughed. Whoopi rolled her eyes. "I'm just saying," Joy continued. "I thought she was going to come in here with designer shoes and a vague accent. Instead, she brought the Constitution." The audience laughed again. Even Whoopi cracked a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. A few days later, Melania was invited to speak at a town hall-style event hosted by a prominent Midwest coalition of small business owners. She stood at the podium calm, confident, her voice smooth but resolute. "I didn't plan to become part of the conversation," she began. "But when the country needs strength, we must all speak. We must all lead. I love this nation because it gave me everything: freedom, opportunity, and a family I cherish. And now I will give it everything in return. My husband may be loud. He may be bold. But make no mistake, he fights for this country because he loves it. And I do too." The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, many with tears in their eyes. People who had never seen her as anything more than a former model or a fashion icon now saw her differently. As a fighter, as a mother, as an American. The buzz didn't fade after a day or two, kept building. For the first time in a long while, conservatives had something new. A voice that didn't sound angry or bombastic, but that landed harder than any shouting match ever could. Melania Trump's TV appearance had struck a rare balance. The poise of a first lady, the sharpness of a policy hawk, and the elegance of a woman with nothing to prove. At Mar-a-Lago, the Trumps sat together in the garden as aides brought them printed coverage from media outlets around the world. Donald, eyes gleaming, tapped the paper. "Melania, they're calling you the new face of the movement." She gave him a small smile and sipped her tea. "Let them talk. I'll keep working." But the reaction was bigger than even the Trump team had expected. Women's groups across the country, even some who weren't politically aligned with the Trumps, issued statements praising Melania's composure. One headline from a women's journal read, "You don't have to yell to lead. Melania Trump shows a different kind of power." A viral Facebook post by a working mother from Michigan summed up the public mood. She didn't insult. She didn't scream. She just spoke truth. And that made the loudest noise of all. "I wasn't a fan before, but after what she did on The View, I'm listening." A shift in the culture war. The View's ratings had spiked the day of Melania's appearance, but so had criticism of their tone. Commentators from both the left and right weighed in on how media often underestimates conservative women, especially ones who don't fit the loud or traditional molds. What happened on that stage was more than a political spat, one podcast host observed. It was the death of the melting ice queen narrative. Melania isn't cold. She's calculated and confident. Some even began comparing her to historic first ladies. Jackie Kennedy for her elegance, Eleanor Roosevelt for her poise under fire. But unlike them, Melania had faced off with a modern media machine that came at her swinging. And she won. Weeks passed, but the echo of the interview lingered. Everywhere Melania went, school visits, charity functions, rallies, people greeted her with newfound admiration. "You gave us hope," one factory worker's wife told her in Pennsylvania. You reminded us that dignity still matters. Political pundits began to speculate. Was this a deliberate move by the Trump camp to position Melania as a major voice in the 2028 elections? Some floated wild ideas, even a potential Senate run someday. Others dismissed it. But one thing was certain. The public was paying attention now. And Melania, once dismissed as a silent partner in a loud administration, had found her voice. And with it, a power no one saw coming. Final scene, The View, revisited. A month later, Whoopi Goldberg opened a new episode of The View with a rare moment of reflection. "All right, folks," she began. "We've had some fiery guests over the years, and sometimes they surprise us." She held up a framed headline from the New York Times. "The day Melania Trump changed the game. Love her or hate her," Whoopi continued, "she made an impact. And that's what this table is for, real talk. Even when it stings." Joy looked over and chuckled. "Just admit it, Whoopi. She roasted you." The audience laughed, and for once so did Whoopi. "Fine. She got me. But hey, at least it wasn't Stormy Daniels." Everyone burst out laughing. Epilogue. As America gears up for the next election season, one clip continues to make the rounds. Melania Trump, facing down the heat, unmoved. Fear never built a bridge. Fear never started a business. Fear never made America great. And underneath it, the caption millions have now come to associate with her.